A Japanese proverb says that the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. That's just one of the sayings that illustrates how Japan might be more male-dominated or masculinist than the United States. Today we want to take on an important topic that could get very controversial. So we're glad that you're here with us. How does Japan treat its women? Are there big differences versus the US? We'll look at how Japan stacks up against the US in terms of economy, society, law, and politics to find out if this saying is true or if there's more to the story. In 2023, the World Economic Forum published their Global Gender Gap Report. This report analyzes differences between genders across 146 countries and covers health, education, economy, and politics. Here's how Japan ranks in these categories and how they compare to the United States. Japan ranks 125th overall out of 146 countries. They rank 141st in political empowerment, 87th in economic participation and opportunity, 100th in educational attainment, and 78th in health and survival. The United States ranks much higher overall at 43rd. They rank 7th in health and survival, 17th in education, 40th in economic participation and opportunity, and 36th in political empowerment. We can see that both countries have a gender gap, meaning that even though men and women might live in the same country and have the same rights, women don't always use those rights or benefit from them in the same way that men do. But Japan clearly has more ground to cover before it reaches gender equality. At first glance, the numbers tell us that Japan is worse than the US in most of the categories. But there's also evidence that Japan has closed the gender gap in some areas since the year 2000. For example, girls now complete more years of schooling on average and infant mortality is lower. In reality, there's no single answer for why this is happening. Experts point towards increased female labor force participation, more access to education, and international exposure due to the internet as some of the reasons. So, what about the workplace? Here's how the two countries compare. According to a study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Japan's female labor force participation rate is actually ahead of the US in 2021. 65.1% of Japanese women participated in the labor force, compared to 57.5% of American women. In other words, more women in Japan work outside the home than in the US. However, it's worth pointing out that Japanese women are still concentrated in certain industries and jobs. Many women in Japan work part-time or irregular jobs with low pay and fewer benefits. Also, while women make up half of university graduates in Japan, they only represent 7.8% of board directors at major companies. The US is not doing so much better. Although women have made progress in education and employment, gender pay gaps persist. Only 18.4% of Fortune 500 CEOs are women, and the highest-earning women executives are still paid less than the average male counterpart. There's also a lot of debate regarding sexual harassment in both countries. In the US, the Me Too movement helped shed light on the extent of sexual harassment and assault. A survey found that 61% of American women have experienced some form of harassment. Japan's rates are hard to compare because of different definitions and reluctance to speak out. A survey that used the same definition as the US found that 10% of Japanese women had experienced sexual harassment at work. Overall, the US has more awareness and legal ways to address sexual harassment. But Japan is slowly making progress. The bottom line, both countries have inequality in the workplace, but Japan has a longer way to go. Now let's look at family, marriage, and gender roles. Traditionally, Japanese women were expected to leave the workforce after marriage and focus on child rearing. In 2023, 53.1% of Japanese women aged 20 and over were neither working nor looking for work. 50% of American women of the same age group were working or looking for work. Even among women who are working, there's a difference. Around 20% of Japanese women are in non-regular jobs with irregular hours or no benefits. One phrase you should know is matahara, which means maternity harassment. It refers to pressure on pregnant workers to quit their jobs. These ideas are deeply rooted in Japan's patriarchal culture and are linked to the country's declining birth rate. Having more children is seen as important for the future of Japan, so the government discourages women from giving up their childbearing years to their careers. As a result, Japan is now discussing quotas for female managers and setting targets for women in politics. Now, these policies aren't perfect solutions, but there's steps towards acknowledging the problem. In the US, 65% of women aged 20 to 64 are in the workforce. Over the last 60 years, changes in family dynamics and economic needs have pushed more women into the workforce. Still, women do more household work and childcare than men. Both countries have issues with balancing work and family life, but Japan's expectation for women to stay home is stronger and more ingrained in society. What about women in politics and public life? Women's presence in politics is one of the clearest indicators of gender equality in a country. Unfortunately, both the US and Japan have a history of underrepresenting women in government. In Japan's national parliament, women make up less than 10% of seats. At the local level, only 7.3% of governors and 12.6% of mayors are women. Even within the prime minister's own party, there's a stark gender imbalance. In contrast, American women make up about 28% of Congress. Again, this is far from equal representation, but it's higher than in Japan. Some argue that Japan's lack of female politicians is partly due to its election system. Others point towards Japan's culture of conformity and the difficulty of breaking through in male-dominated fields. Regardless of the cause, the effect is clear. Japan lacks female role models and voices in politics, which discourages young girls interested in public service. Next, let's talk about legal protections and rights. Both Japan and the US have laws protecting women from discrimination, harassment, and violence. In 1985, Japan ratified the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, also known as CEDAW. This treaty requires countries to take action against any form of discrimination against women. Under C, Japan passed laws prohibiting sexual harassment and establishing women's shelters for domestic violence victims. However, these laws are not always strongly enforced. Discrimination against women is still common in areas such as employment and divorce. In the US, civil rights laws offer stronger legal pathways for victims of gender discrimination. Outcomes vary by state and case, but legal options are generally more robust. Ultimately, no law or statistic can fully capture the lived experiences of women in each country. There are varying opinions and realities for women of different backgrounds, ages, and identities. One of the topics that we wanted to touch upon in this episode is media representation and stereotypes. Japanese media tends to portray women in more traditional roles. Women are often shown as wives, mothers, or caregivers. The josei manga genre, targeted at young women, frequently depicts stories of office workers struggling with love and marriage. On the other hand, American media features a wide range of female representation, from strong, independent women to complex characters with multiple dimensions. Women in US media are not always positive role models, but they are more visible and diverse. It's worth noting that both countries have come a long way. Japan is moving away from its historical emphasis on housewives and caregivers, while the US is moving away from overly sexualized or stereotypical portrayals of women. However, both countries have room for improvement. Now, we'd like to hear from you. What do you think about the portrayal of women in your country's media? Feel free to comment below. Now, back to the episode. Gender roles, attitudes, and stereotypes also play a big role in how men and women are perceived in each country. Japanese society is known for its emphasis on collectivism, conformity, and respect for authority. Traditional gender roles are still prevalent, and there's often an unspoken pressure for women to prioritize family over career. Masculinist norms are more socially normalized in Japan than in the US. Men are expected to be hardworking, dedicated to their jobs, and financially successful providers for their family. Women are expected to be caregivers, prioritizing the needs of their family and maintaining a harmonious household. In the US, the feminist movement and changing social norms have given women more freedom and opportunities. Individualism and personal fulfillment are highly valued, and there's a greater acceptance of women pursuing their goals outside of traditional gender roles. Despite progress, backlash against women's rights still exists in both countries. What can be done to improve the situation for women in Japan? Both the US and Japan have made efforts to promote gender equality. However, progress is slow. In Japan, initiatives include government targets for female leadership, campaigns against matahara, and measures to support working mothers. In the US, Awareness campaigns, legal protections, and women as shelters are some of the ways the country tries to protect women and promote gender equality. Despite these efforts, there's still a long way to go. So is Japan more male-dominated than the US? Based on our analysis of various factors such as legal rights, economic participation, and political representation, the answer is yes. Both countries have issues when it comes to gender equality. Japan's gender gap is wider in many areas, indicating a more male-dominated society. However, it's crucial to avoid Each country has its unique challenges, and progress is not linear. What do you think? Is Japan more male-dominated than the US? Let us know in the comments, and thank you for watching.